Okay, I'm going to make this next audio video here again about the RPG hobby. And I want to go ahead and talk a little bit more about the second part, as promised, on the horror RPGs. Now, I talked a little bit last video about the actual mechanics, the mood, and tone to run a successful horror RPG, but this time I want to talk a little bit about some of the inspiration, whether it be literature, TV, or film, that you can use for your horror campaign. Now, there's various subgenres of horror that can be used in a campaign depending on the mood and tone that you want to use. And I'll talk just very briefly about those. There's like what I like to call the schlock horror. And schlock horror um, is similar for those of you who remember and those of you who are old enough, like in the early and mid 80s. Up until about like the early 90s, there was a lot of direct to video type horror movies. Really good fun if you were looking for a entertaining, if somewhat um, less than well done type storylines and effects, acting, but they were good fun. That type of horror is a little more lighthearted, and I know that's a little bit of a contradiction in and of itself, horror being lighthearted. But if you are interested in watching some of these, I would have to recommend probably like the Friday the 13th series that came out back in the 80s and early 90s. I have to recommend also like the other slasher films, like the Halloween series from the same time period. Plus, you can also find other type movies. Roger Corman did a lot of films along the same lines, which are really good fun and do have some scary moments scattered throughout, but nothing that would win an Academy Award. Now, also, if you wanted to get what I like to call or get into the top um, tier of the horror genre, I have to recommend that you start with H.P. Lovecraft. Now, he is, of course, the creator of the Cthulhu mythos, and he wrote quite a few stories in the early 20th century. One, you can probably get like his anthologies, which carry most, if not all, of his works. In particular, I would recommend a Dunwich Horror, Call of Cthulhu, Haunter in the Dark, The Whisper in the Darkness, The Thing in the Doorstep, Shadow over Innsmouth, Pickman's Model, The Colors Out of Space, The Rats in the Wall. That's a really good one. Cool Air, Terrible Old Man, and A Shadow Out of Time. Now, he also did Dagon, which is another really good horror novel, horror short story. Um, there's also other ones you could get, like there's Reanimator. Reanimator was made into the film as well as in the 80s, which I consider to be schlock horror, but is also very well done and something that I would recommend that you take a look at if you're just looking for a little bit of schlock. Other books that you could get probably is The Dream Cycles of H.P. Lovecraft. Those are really good. Another author is Clark Ashton Smith. He wrote such stories, short stories as The Devotee of Evil, The Door to Saturn, The Plutonian Drug, The Carnal God, The Nemesis of the Unfinished, just to name a few. Robert E. Howard of Conan fame also did one short story, horror based, called The Nameless Cults. You can look up such writers as Robert Bloch, Ramsey Campbell. He did some very interesting short stories like The Faces at Pine Dunes and The Moon Lens, which happens to be one of my all-time favorites. You can also look at other, authors. Robert Price, Lynn Carter are very good sources for inspiration for your horror campaigns. Um, you also may want to look at some of the works of Edgar Allan Poe or Ambrose Bierce. He's very well known and did very good stories like the Damn Thing and the Moonlit Road, which are very good stories. Arthur Matkin did the novel of the White Powder, and also the Shining Pyramid and the Great God Pan. Very excellent short stories. I do recommend everyone taking a look at those. Shirley Jackson, if you want to look at something a little more modern, did The Haunting of Hill House. Stephen King, Salem's Lot, was basically just a revision and a more modern version of the classical Dracula stories. Brian Lumley was also a writer who did a story called The Burrowers Beneath, which is kind of a very unsettling story to say the least. And that pretty much concludes this segment for the horror type games. That if you're interested in running those, I do recommend that you do wet your feet a little bit and try a horror game. Kind of pull away from the fantasy and sci-fi and try something new. I can guarantee that your group will appreciate it and enjoy it. Having said that, I now would like to talk a little bit about D&D Next, or 5th edition, that's going to be coming out probably sometime. I believe the box comes out in July. And I'll, of course, be picking that up either from a retailer, local retailer, or from Amazon.com or some other form of online shopping. I saw a recent question and answers segment with Chris Perkins and Mike Merles, where they answered a few questions. And I have to say that there was one thing in particular that got me very excited about the concept design, the design concept for the next iteration of Dungeons and Dragons. That being that when asked what the core system, not the add-on books that assuredly will come later or the add-on rules, but the core system about what is the completeness and the difficulty level and the mechanic, if it can be summed up into one word, what is that similar to, or what is the most similar to, going back to previous editions of Dungeons and Dragons? The answer to that by Mike Merles was that it will have the level of complexity, completeness, and of course a more updated mechanic, modern mechanic, but it would be the most similar to the Rule Cyclopedia for the basic Dungeons and Dragons. I believe came out in 1991 or 1992. When I heard this, that book being one of my all-time favorite mechanics and set of rules to run Dungeons and Dragons with, at least the more classical style Dungeons and Dragons, I was very excited to hear this, for the simple fact that it is probably one of the most complete books that encompass the entire, in one volume, the entire knowledge a DM or would need to run a Dungeons and Dragons game. It has everything from character creation, the core mechanic as well, the way to use level advancement, the way to use rewards, to create where the players can carve out their own domains and domain management, mass combat. It's not quite as rules heavy as 3.5 or 3.0, and certainly a world of difference from 4th edition, but it's a happy medium ground in my opinion, where it has something for everybody, where it's still not indistinguishable from Dungeons and Dragons the way that, in my opinion, 4th edition was. It's been stated, and I happen to, in my opinion, agree with the estimation that 4th edition was basically an MMO online computer game that you played on tabletop. Now, there are a few aspects of fourth edition. Having read the books, I've never actually played the game, but having read the books, learning the mechanic, learning the ins and outs of the core set of rules that I enjoyed. One of them was the classification of the monsters in the monster book, where you had your brutes, you had your long range type monsters that could attack at range. And I found that a general classification of all monster types like that would be very helpful at times, and at certain times, not exclusively, but at certain times when you're setting up encounters or you're writing up encounters for the adventure. So, having said that, I'm really looking forward to the release of 5th edition. I hope that they release the books, which I think they probably will, probably one every month, starting in probably July, late July, sometime in August. I'm really looking forward to that. I'm really looking forward to getting back into a Dungeons and Dragons that is appealing once again. There were some things I liked about all of the editions, and then there was again some things I disliked about all editions. One of the things I disliked, I would have to point out about third and 3.5, is that the level of advancement was too generic, in my opinion. The reason I say that is because I kind of look at what real world examples of, say, different professions in the real world, and the level of complexity and the level of mastery needed to master certain professions in the real world. Take, for example, a police officer, a uniformed police officer, a fighter pilot, and a brain surgeon. If you start with a police officer, in my opinion, that would be a somewhat easier profession to master, and therefore translated in game terms would be a little more quicker as far as level advancement, from getting from level 3 to level 5 to level 8 in progression as you went through the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the level progression, as opposed to the slower, harder level progression of the say fighter pilot. Fighter pilot has to really understand the vehicle he or she is operating to operate it effectively in a combat situation, and it's a little bit difficult. The equipment's a little harder to master than, say, the equipment used by a beat cop. Same can be said for a brain surgeon. He's dealing with a very complex piece of machinery, attempting to repair or to heal a very complex piece of machinery. Therefore, it takes a brain surgeon many, many years in medical school, as opposed to a fighter pilot being certified or a police officer being licensed and certified for community protection. Now, having said that, I'm really looking forward, and I'm sure that there's going to be maybe one or two things about 5th edition that people are going to like or dislike, but I'm really impressed by the amount of thought and play testing, experimentation, listening to feedback that Wizards of the Coast has actually decided to put within their pre-printing of the next set of rules. For those of you who remember, between the years between 3.5 and 4th edition were not many. I have 4th edition sitting on my shelf, the 3 books in the slipcase, and next to the 3.5 books, and the 3.5 books are slightly thicker than the 4th edition books. The 4th edition books are about the same thickness, I want to say, as my AD&D 2nd edition books. But if worst comes to worst, which I'm really hoping, and I have high hopes that I can reasonably expect that Wizards of the Coast will put out a superior product than they did last time out. That if worse comes to worse, and it fifth edition totally fails, it totally fails to capture the feel, spirit, and essence of Dungeons and Dragons, then there's a little kind of an old school Renaissance game that I've been looking at here lately as a fallback, as a backup plan to Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition if it fails, and that's from Troll Lord Games, the Councils and Crusades, which I have been looking at quite, giving it pretty hard looks here lately, and but hopefully that route's not going to need to be taken. I also want to put a word out there to the RPG community or any role players. You don't have to necessarily be part of the YouTube RPG community, but I am currently in between campaigns currently right now for my gaming group. And I've been looking at different possibilities for the gaming group. I've been looking at different styles of games, different types of games. And right now I'm having one of my players actually run a anime themed campaign that is kind of what I like to call a Shadow Chasers type campaign, which deals with modern times, but set in the modern setting, but with magic and spells and the paranormal all exist. So he's running that campaign for us right now, and the level of horror and darkness currently, I think we've run a success 2 sessions with it currently, so the campaign is still fairly new. The level of the darkness involved in it, it's a little heavier than PG. I would say that it's probably like a PG-13. It's not as heavy as an R movie, but I'm sure that RPGs, anybody who's GM'd or DM knows that tone, feel, and mood, it's a bit of a sliding scale. There's a general theme and mood that's attempted, or as a DM, GM, you attempt to maintain throughout, but at the same time, it does slide either left or right a bit. Now, that campaign will probably go on for about maybe another month or so, at which time my gaming group has expressed that they would like me to start running games again. And I've expressed too that probably what I'll do is run a few horror campaigns, not a campaign, but like few horror sessions, where basically the story arc or the storyline runs for about 3 to 5 sessions at most, and then the story arc or the story is done. It's been told. I've also been looking at a post-apocalyptic type setting, Gamma World, which Gamma World 4th edition I think is a superior Gamma World. Not Gamma World 4th edition for the 4th edition rules, but the actual 4th edition Gamma World that came out, I believe, sometime in the early or mid 90s. I've also looked at that. I've also looked at several other science fiction games. I've also recently been kind of looking at a borrowed copy that I got of the Numenera game by Monty Cook. I'm really impressed by this game. The overall design, the artwork, the mechanic is very quite impressive. If I have any one complaint so far with the materials out there, is that only human or human augmented characters can be used. I was kind of hoping that there would be non-humans. One of those as playable characters. I'm one of those guys that appreciates a large collage, a large stew, if you will, of character and players' choices that the players can select in a game. Take, for example, by what I mean, for example, like the Star Trek sci-fi game. you have humans, of course, but you can have Klingons and Romulans and Gorn and Tellarites and just a whole collection of non-human characters. Because some players actually like to get in and actually role play or exemplify exemplify that alienness of a certain character race or character type. And even our beloved D&D has more than one race. Yeah, as far as humans are concerned, we have elves and dwarves and halflings, which are human-like, but not exactly human. So those were just some of my thoughts for 5th edition for horror-type campaigns, and also asking the people who actually watch and listen to this video, what are some suggestions that y'all would have for a good kind of a campaign that I could introduce to the players? Like I said, we've been playing for almost 20 years, and we've done the entire fantasy, standard, sci-fi worlds of Star Wars and Star Trek. While those are fun, extremely fun, who doesn't like blowing up a few Star Destroyers or Klingon heavy battle cruisers, or going into the dungeon with your trusty dwarf and elf companions? I'm looking for some games that are a little bit offbeat, a little bit different, but also inspire a sense of wonder and wow, this is new kind of reaction from not only the players but from myself as a GM. Um, so that's the question I have for y'all out there. So maybe if you could kind of shoot me a few suggestions, that would be most appreciated. Also, I wanted to leave with one other comment. This is not exactly a pitch for any particular product. Although this product I'm going to mention has been one of my favorite products for some years now. And I have to say right off the bat that this product is not intended for a younger audience. I think that maybe an audience around, I don't know, and this is just my personal opinion, around a pretty mature 16, 17, 18-year-old, I think that this material would be appropriate for them to read. But I want to talk a little bit about the Heavy Metal magazine. It details a large and a genre of different types of stories. It's in graphic novel design and format. The art designs and the artwork within this publication are top notch. You get within one magazine, and the magazine I believe is bi-monthly, so you get like 6 issues a year. But the artwork is really first rate. You get a really wide range of different types of artwork in this magazine publication, in just one volume, in just one magazine. You'll have 4 or 5 different contributing artists in 4 or 5 different stories. Within these stories as well, you'll get, the entire range of fantasy fiction, from straight up high fantasy to low magic fantasy to science fiction, hardened space opera science fiction to cyberpunk to modern day horror to steampunk to just a wide range of different types of stories. Some stories are extremely short, maybe a couple pages, done maybe in black and white. Now, you'll get the stories or parts of stories per issue, but a story, because of the bi-monthliness of the magazine and the amount of space that the story receives within each magazine, to complete a story from beginning to end may run 2 years. But it's definitely worth it. Now, the level of violence, gore, profanity, and sexual content within the magazine can be quite high. But it's done in such a way where it's entertaining and not there solely for the purpose of shock value, or simply, we have to have TNA in here because TNA sells. But in order to drive the story forward, which if it were anything other than that, I would definitely have a problem with it. But it's done in such a way that it actually benefits the storylines. But I do recommend this. It's fairly inexpensive to get. I think that for a 1 year subscription, depending on what specials are being run, you can probably pick it up for $20 to $22. Normal, I think, cover price for 1 year somewhere around $30, but what translates roughly into about um, you know X amount of dollars a month or bi-monthly as you receive them. So, as I said, it's a really good magazine to get. Some specials, will run 550. They'll have certain theme magazine specials that you can get. So definitely check it out. It's something to draw some inspiration from. The artwork is top notch. I have to say that the stories within this magazine, Heavy Metal Magazine, is actually a lot better. Uh, Much more well written than, say, what typically comes out on the Sci-Fi Channel on cable television or satellite television. Sci-Fi Channel has maybe one or two shows right now that are decent. Um, Most of the time, the movie of the weeks are so poorly acted, so poorly written, and so poorly executed in special effects and overall that they become basically unwatchable. Even if you're looking for schlock type horror or schlock type science fiction. So maybe I'll do a video, little vlog on different types of schlock movies. Actually, get a list together and talk to y'all a little more in the future about different types of movies that, while really bad, are actually so bad they're actually good. So that's really what I wanted to talk about today. And thank you for listening to this video. And next video, I think I'll have probably focus in on more, say, one or two subjects instead of trying to hit 4 or 5 subjects in a 30-minute little vlog. But until then, just everyone out there, continue to game and happy gaming.